Thermal signatures were spiking in the eastern quadrant, and King Cassius was focused on the ceremonial ink. I ran the data again. The secondary access points showed clear vulnerability patterns. No redundancy protocols. Single-point failure architecture. 12 ceremonial blades displayed on unsecured velvet, each one a potential contamination vector for the blood oath ritual. 30 seconds into my diagnostic assessment, the algorithm flagged it. Catastrophic failure mode. Any competent operative could introduce a toxic compound into the ceremonial daggers and eliminate the entire continental leadership in under 4 minutes. I didn't see a sacred ritual. I saw infrastructure bleeding efficiency. My finger hovered over the master audio control. Professional calculation, not impulse. The most efficient way to stop a system failure is to cut power to the process. I killed the music. The silence was absolute. 200 alpha predators turned as one, hunting for the variable that had disrupted their ceremony. I stepped out of the shadows and walked to the center of the floor, my heels clicking against marble with the rhythm of a technical countdown. Professional. Unhurried. The gait of someone who had already identified the solution and was simply informing the system of its deficiencies. Stop. My voice carried the same modulation I used in boardrooms. Your protocol is trash. King Cassius's golden eyes locked onto mine, not with anger, with assessment, calculating whether I was a threat or simply the most interesting anomaly he'd encountered in 3 decades of tactical dominance. I held his gaze and didn't bow. 48 hours earlier, I was in my Seattle office when the emergency contract landed on my desk. The Royal Council didn't make house calls. They sent a beta named Sebastian Cole, who looked like he'd stepped out of a tactical manual, all sharp angles and sharper intelligence behind wire-rimmed glasses. Ms. Bennett, he placed a sealed envelope on my desk. The council requires your expertise. I didn't open it immediately. I studied him instead, reading the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes tracked every exit in my office. High threat assessment. Time-sensitive crisis. What's the situation? King Cassius refuses to implement standard security protocols for the Alpha Summit. He operates on instinct rather than procedure. The council believes this creates an unacceptable risk vector. I opened the envelope. The fee made my student loan debt look like pocket change. You want me to babysit a king who thinks he's invincible. We want you to identify the structural vulnerabilities in his leadership model before someone exploits them. Sebastian adjusted his glasses. You're the youngest Master Auditor in the Continental Security Guild. Your specialty is high ego leadership structures. The king is the highest ego we have. I accepted because the money was excellent and my curiosity was piqued. Also because Sebastian's dossier on King Cassius read like a case study in brilliant tactical thinking married to catastrophic administrative blindness. The Obsidian Palace sat on a mountain cliff that made every approach visible for miles. Impressive infrastructure. The problem wasn't the fortress. It was the man running it. My first encounter with the king happened in a hallway. I was reviewing perimeter sensor logs on my tablet when a door exploded open and a massive figure filled the corridor. King Cassius Thorne was over 6'4", built like a weapon, moving with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent his life in combat. His presence hit like a pressure wave. He stopped when he saw me, tilted his head slightly. Predatory assessment. You're the auditor. I'm the specialist the council hired to prevent your assassination. I didn't look up from my tablet. You're blocking the corridor. I need to inspect the secondary access points. Most people would have moved. He smiled instead. Not a friendly smile, an intrigued one. Sebastian said you were direct. Sebastian said you ignore data in favor of instinct. That's a liability in modern threat assessment. I finally looked up. Met those golden eyes that probably made weaker people forget how to breathe. Your instincts are tactically sound. Strategically, you're a disaster waiting for a trigger event. He laughed. Actually laughed. A deep rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the stone walls. I think I'm going to enjoy this audit. He moved aside, but slowly, making me walk past him in the narrow corridor. testing whether I'd show discomfort at the proximity. I treated it like walking past furniture. His scent hit me as I passed. Rain-soaked forest and weapon oil. My brain cataloged it as a data point, nothing more. I had 3 days to find the flaw before the summit began. I spent 72 hours treating the Obsidian Palace like a technical problem to be solved. The flaw wasn't in the walls. It was in the ceremony itself. The blood oath protocol was elegant in its simplicity. Each alpha would cut their palm with a ceremonial dagger, press their hand to the treaty document, and bind themselves to the alliance through their blood signature. The problem was the daggers. I stood at the security console, watching the ceremony set up through multiple camera angles. The 12 ceremonial blades were displayed on a velvet-lined case at the center of the table. Beautiful, ancient, completely unsecured. Any of the 200 alphas in that room could swap a blade, coat it with poison, introduce a contaminated weapon into a ritual that required every leader to cut themselves open. I pulled up the historical precedent files on my tablet. 3 regime collapses in the last century. Same attack vector, different continents, identical oversight. The ceremony music swelled. King Cassius stood at the head of the table, radiating the kind of primal authority that made lesser wolves bare their necks instinctively. I killed the music. The silence was absolute. Shocked. 200 predators turning to identify the threat. I walked onto the floor. My heels clicked against marble with measured precision. Professional. Unhurried. The sound of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Stop. Your protocol is trash. The king's beta moved toward me. Sebastian's hand went to his sidearm. King Cassius raised one hand, stopping them both without breaking eye contact with me. Explain. Not a request, a command that expected competence in response. I gestured to the dagger display. Your blood oath requires every alpha present to cut their palm with a ceremonial blade. Current setup allows for weapon substitution. Any competent assassin could introduce a poison blade into the rotation. You'd have 12 dead alphas and a continental war before anyone identified the contamination vector. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some dismissive, others calculating. I pulled up my tablet and projected the data onto the main screen behind the treaty table. Historical precedent. The Crimson Accord Massacre, 1847. 43 alphas dead from silver-laced daggers during a blood oath ceremony. The Northern Alliance collapse, 1923. Wolfsbane coating on ceremonial weapons, 16 fatalities. The Pacific Rim Treaty Disaster, 1967. Aconite poisoning through blade contamination, 29 dead. I walked to the dagger display and picked up one of the blades, examining it with clinical detachment. Your security team swept these weapons for obvious threats, but they didn't account for cumulative exposure toxins. A skilled operative could coat these blades with a compound that's harmless in trace amounts, but lethal when multiple alphas are cut in sequence and their blood mingles on the treaty document. King Cassius moved closer. Not threatening, focused. Your proposed fix. I set the blade down and pulled a small case from my jacket. Individual single-use scalpels, medical grade. Sealed packaging that shows tampering. Each alpha opens their own blade in full view of the assembly. The treaty document is divided into sections so blood signatures don't cross-contaminate. Simple. Elegant. Makes you look smarter for implementing it instead of defensive for having the flaw pointed out. The room held its breath. King Cassius studied me for a long moment. Then his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. More like recognition. Implement your fix. He turned to address the room, his voice carrying absolute authority. The auditor has operational command of this ceremony. Anyone who questions her protocols can explain their objections to me personally. The threat was implicit and unmistakable. He looked back at me, and this time the smile reached his eyes. Then meet me in the war room. I have other problems that need your particular brand of correction. I didn't wait for the applause that wasn't coming. I walked out of the ballroom while the alphas were still processing the fact that a human had just rewritten their sacred ritual. By the time I reached the war room, the adrenaline had settled into a cold, analytical focus. The war room looked like a battlefield command center had collided with a corporate disaster. Maps covered every available surface. Intelligence reports stacked in precarious towers. Half-eaten meals abandoned on tactical displays. The organizational system appeared to be organized chaos, with heavy emphasis on the chaos. King Cassius operated like a general who'd never left the front lines. Brilliant in the moment, catastrophic at documentation. I stood in the doorway conducting my initial assessment. No redundancy protocols, outdated intelligence management systems, critical data stored in formats that would be useless if his primary analyst got hit by a bus. The king watched me from behind a massive oak desk that looked like it had survived several wars. His focus was predatory. Most clients observed from a distance. He studied me like I was a tactical problem he was actively solving. I ignored the attention and started working. Pulled out my tablet, began cataloging the structural failures in his command infrastructure. 20 minutes later, I'd reorganized his entire operational framework. His advisors looked horrified. A beta named Marcus actually made a strangled sound when I consolidated 3 redundant intelligence streams into a single prioritized feed. King Cassius leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that same assessing look intensifying. You just dismantled a system that took me 5 years to build. I optimized a system that was bleeding efficiency. I didn't look up from my tablet. You're running a kingdom like a military campaign. Tactically brilliant. Strategically, you're a liability to yourself. Elaborate. I finally met his eyes. You make decisions based on real-time battlefield assessment. That works when you're fighting rogues in the mountains. It fails catastrophically when you're managing continental politics, economic policy, and diplomatic relations. You need predictive modeling, risk assessment matrices, contingency protocols for scenarios you haven't personally experienced. I pulled up a visualization on the main screen. Your current model. Identify threat, neutralize threat, move to next threat. It's reactive. You're the strongest wolf in the room, so you've survived on pure dominance. But you're building a kingdom, not winning a war. Kingdoms require infrastructure, systems that function when you're not personally present to enforce them. The advisors exchanged nervous glances. No one spoke to the king like this. King Cassius stood up, moved around the desk with that fluid predator grace, stopped 3 feet from where I stood. Most people would have stepped back. I held my ground, maintaining professional distance without retreating. You're telling me I'm incompetent. I'm telling you that you're tactically exceptional and administratively negligent. There's a difference. I gestured to the reorganized data streams on my tablet. You have the instincts. You lack the structure to scale those instincts beyond your personal sphere of influence. That's not incompetence. It's a skill gap. His expression shifted. Not anger. Something closer to fascination. How long have you been waiting to say that to someone? I say it to every high-ego client. You're just the first one who's actually listening. He laughed. That same deep rumbling sound from the hallway. But this time it carried genuine amusement instead of territorial assessment. Sebastian was right. You're exactly what I need. Sebastian hired me to prevent your assassination. I'm currently trying to prevent your administrative collapse. They're related problems. King Cassius moved closer, not threatening, testing. And if I told you I want you to stay permanently, fix all of it, I'd say that's a contract negotiation. And I don't negotiate terms while standing in a war room that smells like old coffee and tactical anxiety. The smirk that crossed his face was pure challenge. Then let's negotiate somewhere more comfortable. Dinner, tonight, my private study. That's not a negotiation. That's a date. Is there a difference? I met his eyes and didn't blink. Yes, one has clear deliverables and defined success metrics. The other is a waste of my professional time. He leaned in slightly, close enough that I caught that scent again. Rain and weapon oil and something else. Something that made my analytical brain catalog it as a variable requiring further investigation. Humor me, Ms. Bennett. Consider it a working dinner. We'll discuss your contract terms. And I'll try very hard not to make it feel like a date. I calculated the risk-reward ratio, turned it into a professional decision. Fine, but I'm billing you for the time. His smirk widened. Absolutely worth it. The private study turned out to be less comfortable and more aggressively masculine. Dark leather furniture, stone fireplace large enough to roast a small vehicle, bookshelves filled with military history, and what appeared to be first edition tactical manuals dating back 3 centuries. King Cassius poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if I wanted one. Expensive bottle, the kind that costs more than most people's monthly rent. I accepted the glass but didn't drink. You said we'd discuss contract terms. We will. He settled into the chair across from me, looking entirely too relaxed for someone whose kingdom I'd just systematically criticized. But first, I want to understand how you think. You want to assess whether I'm worth the investment. I want to know if you can handle what I'm actually asking you to do. I set the glass down on the side table, which is fix everything. He gestured broadly, encompassing not just the room, but apparently his entire operational infrastructure. The security protocols, the administrative systems, the political relationships I've damaged through tactical brilliance and diplomatic incompetence, all of it. That's not an audit. That's a complete organizational overhaul. Yes. I leaned back, studying him with the same clinical assessment I'd use on any high-risk client. You're asking me to rebuild your kingdom's operational framework while you continue to run it. That's like performing surgery on a patient who refuses anesthesia and keeps trying to do jumping jacks. He smiled. Accurate. It's also going to require full operational authority. I can't fix structural problems if I have to route every decision through a chain of command that includes advisors who think I'm overstepping. You'll have it. In writing, with clear parameters defining my scope of authority and your commitment to implementing my recommendations, even when they contradict your instincts. Done. I pulled out my tablet and opened a contract template. Compensation structure. I don't work hourly for projects this scope. I require a base fee plus performance incentives tied to measurable outcomes. Name your price. I did. It was aggressive. The kind of number that made most clients blink. King Cassius didn't blink. Agreed. What else? Autonomy. I work alone. I don't do committee decisions or consensus-building exercises. You hired me for my expertise. That means trusting my judgment even when it makes people uncomfortable. I'm not hiring you to make people comfortable. I'm hiring you to make my kingdom functional. Good, because the first thing I'm going to do is fire at least 3 of your senior advisors. He raised an eyebrow. Based on the 48 hours I've spent observing your operation. You have loyalty confused with competence. Several of your longest-serving advisors are actively hindering your effectiveness because they're protecting outdated systems that give them personal power. You've identified specific individuals. I've identified specific structural problems that happen to have names attached to them. I pulled up my preliminary assessment on the tablet. Your head of intelligence is running a system designed for regional conflicts, not continental politics. Your economic advisor is using financial models from before the digital age. Your diplomatic corps operates like we're still in an era where it took 3 weeks to send a message across territories. King Cassius leaned forward, his focus sharpening. You built this analysis in 2 days. I built this analysis in 18 hours. I spent the rest of the time confirming my initial assessment and identifying the replacement candidates who can actually do the jobs. He was quiet for a long moment. Not uncomfortable silence, evaluative silence. Sebastian said you were the best. He didn't mention you were also terrifying. I'm not terrifying. I'm thorough. Most people can't tell the difference. His expression shifted into something I couldn't quite categorize. Respect mixed with something else. Something that made my analytical brain flag it as a variable requiring monitoring. When can you start? I already started. The question is when you're ready to implement the changes I'm going to recommend. Tomorrow. That's ambitious. You just told me my kingdom is held together with tactical brilliance and administrative incompetence. I prefer to fix that before someone exploits it. I saved the contract terms to my tablet. Then we have a deal. I'll have the formal documentation ready by morning. King Cassius raised his untouched whiskey glass. To systematic destruction of my comfortable chaos. I picked up my glass and met his eyes. To structural integrity. We drank. The whiskey was excellent. The variable I'd been monitoring intensified. I ignored it and focused on the work. The deal was signed in ink and whiskey. I didn't wait for morning to start the systematic demolition of his comfortable chaos. 72 hours later, I was deep in the digital bones of his kingdom, looking for the rot I knew was there. 3 days into the systematic overhaul, I was still working when most of the palace had gone to sleep. The archive room was my current project. Financial records dating back 50 years, stored in a filing system that appeared to be organized by whatever box had space. I'd requisitioned proper scanning equipment and spent the evening digitizing everything into a searchable database. That's when I found the pattern. Military expenditures that didn't correspond to any actual deployments. Equipment purchases for units that didn't exist on the official roster. Supply requisitions signed off by the king, but processed through accounts he didn't personally monitor. Someone with high-level access was systematically bleeding resources from the kingdom's military budget. The embezzlement was sophisticated. Small amounts spread across multiple accounts over years, the kind of theft that required intimate knowledge of the system and absolute confidence that no one was watching closely enough to notice. I pulled up the access logs and cross-referenced them with the financial discrepancies. The pattern crystallized. I was compiling the evidence chain when I felt the shift in air pressure that meant I was no longer alone. I didn't turn around. The archive room locks automatically at midnight. You either have override access or you pick the lock. I have override access. King Cassius's voice came from directly behind me, close enough that I caught that scent again. You're still working. I found something that couldn't wait until morning. I pulled up the financial analysis on my laptop screen. Your kingdom is bleeding resources. Systematic embezzlement disguised as military expenditures. Approximately $8 million in diverted funds over the last 4 years. He moved to stand beside me, studying the data with the same focused intensity he brought to tactical assessments. His arm brushed mine as he leaned in to see the screen better. I shifted slightly, maintained professional distance. Show me the access pattern. I pulled up the security logs. The thief is someone with authorization to approve military expenditures without secondary verification. That limits the suspect pool to your inner circle. 5 people have that level of access. His expression went cold. Not angry. Colder than angry. The kind of expression that explained why people called him the Wolf of War. You've identified which one? I've narrowed it to 2 candidates based on behavioral patterns and opportunity windows. I need another 12 hours to build a complete evidence chain that will hold up under legal scrutiny. I want immediate action. You want to rip someone's throat out. I want to dismantle their entire operation and identify everyone involved in the conspiracy. I met his eyes. There's a difference. Your way gets you revenge. My way gets you justice and prevents it from happening again. He was quiet for a moment. I could see the predator warring with the king. Instinct versus strategy. How long do you actually need? 18 hours. Maybe 24 if they've been careful about covering their digital trail. You'll have it, but I want updates every 4 hours. That's micromanagement. That's me not sleeping until I know who's been stealing from my people. I save my work and close the laptop. The thief is someone you trust, someone close enough to your operations that they knew exactly which accounts wouldn't be audited regularly. This is going to be personal for you. It's already personal. His jaw tightened. No one has ever been competent enough to catch something like this before. They've been operating with impunity because I was too focused on external threats to see the internal rot. That's not incompetence. That's the limitation of running everything through personal oversight. You can't be everywhere. That's why you need systems. I stood up, gathering my equipment, and that's why you hired me. King Cassius looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite categorize. I hired you to prevent my assassination. You're currently saving my kingdom. They're the same problem, just different attack vectors. He moved closer. Not threatening, something else entirely. You're not afraid of me. You're a client. I don't fear clients. I fix their structural problems and bill them accordingly. His mouth curved into that dangerous smile. Most people can't separate the king from the wolf. Most people aren't very good at their jobs. He laughed quietly. Then his expression shifted into something serious. Find them, Rena. Find everyone involved, and I'll handle the rest. I held his gaze. Justice, not revenge. We'll negotiate the terms when you give me the names. I spent the next 18 hours building the profile like I was assembling a weapon. Methodical, precise, no room for error. The financial data told me what. The access logs told me when. The behavioral analysis told me who. Lord Marcus Voss, the king's oldest advisor, 23 years of loyal service, decorated veteran of 3 territorial wars, the man King Cassius trusted to manage military logistics while he focused on tactical operations. The perfect position to embezzle millions without detection. I sat in the archive room at 4 a.m, staring at the evidence chain I'd built. It was airtight. Bank transfers traced through shell corporations, equipment purchases that never resulted in actual deliveries, supply contracts with companies that existed only on paper. Voss had been bleeding the kingdom dry for 4 years, long enough to build a substantial war chest. The question was, what do you plan to do with it? I pulled up the secondary analysis, cross-referenced the embezzlement timeline with political events, found the correlation. Every major fund diversion corresponded with a period of political tension, border disputes, trade negotiations, diplomatic incidents that weakened the king's position with the Continental Council. Voss wasn't just stealing money. He was funding destabilization. The door opened. I didn't need to turn around to know it was King Cassius. His presence had a gravitational pull I was getting uncomfortably good at recognizing. You found them. I found him. I pulled up the profile on my laptop. Lord Marcus Voss, your head of military logistics. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. King Cassius moved to stand behind my chair. I felt the tension radiating off him like heat from a forge. Predator recognizing betrayal. Show me everything. I walked him through the evidence, the financial trail, the shell corporations, the pattern of destabilization funding. I kept my voice clinical, professional, treating it like any other case analysis. He was silent until I finished. Then, how long? 4 years of confirmed activity. Possibly longer, but the records before that were stored in a format that makes analysis difficult. He's been planning this since before I took the throne. He's been planning this since he realized you were competent enough to be a threat to whatever power structure he's trying to preserve. I pulled up a secondary analysis. The embezzlement accelerated after you implemented the territorial reforms 2 years ago, the ones that reduced the autonomy of regional military commanders. King Cassius's hands clenched on the back of my chair. He's funding a coup. He's funding the infrastructure for a coup. Whether he's planning to execute it himself or sell the resources to someone else, I can't determine from the financial data alone. I want him arrested immediately. I want complete evidence before we move. If Voss has co-conspirators, arresting him now alerts everyone else in the network. We lose the opportunity to dismantle the entire operation. The predator in him wanted blood. The king in him knew I was right. How long? 48 hours. I need to trace the outflow accounts and identify everyone who's been receiving funds. Then we move simultaneously. Clean sweep. No one gets advance warning. He was quiet for a long moment. I could feel him processing. Instinct warring with strategy. You're asking me to let a traitor walk free for 2 more days. I'm asking you to be smart instead of fast. There's a difference. His hand moved from the chair back to my shoulder. Not aggressive. Something else. You've never had someone betray you like this. I've had plenty of people betray me. I just don't let it compromise my professional judgment. He leaned down slightly, close enough that I felt his breath against my ear. 48 hours. Then we burn his house down. I didn't move. Justice, not revenge. We'll see. 48 hours later, I walked into an emergency council meeting with a tablet full of evidence and zero patience for political theater. The council chamber was designed for intimidation. Vaulted ceilings, stone walls that absorbed sound, a circular table where 12 of the kingdom's most powerful alphas sat in judgment of anything that threatened their comfortable power structures. They were already hostile before I entered. A human woman, an outsider, someone who'd been given operational authority that superseded their own. The resentment was thick enough to taste. Lord Marcus Voss sat in his usual position at the king's right hand. 23 years of loyal service, decorated war hero, beloved mentor to half the wolves in the room. Also a traitor who'd embezzled $8 million and funded a destabilization campaign against his own king. He looked calm, confident. A man who believed his position was unassailable. I was about to dismantle that confidence with spreadsheets and bank records. King Cassius stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. The auditor has findings to present. You will listen. I connected my tablet to the main display screen, pulled up the financial analysis I'd spent 48 hours perfecting. Gentlemen, over the past 4 years, approximately $8.3 million have been diverted from the kingdom's military budget through fraudulent equipment purchases and ghost unit expenditures. Murmurs rippled around the table. Some shocked, others calculating. Lord Voss leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to paternal condescension. Ms. Bennett, with respect, you've been here less than a week. Our financial systems are complex. It's possible you've misinterpreted routine military expenditures as irregularities. It's possible you think I'm incompetent. I pulled up the first evidence chain. It's not possible that you accidentally approved purchases for 300 tactical rifles that were never delivered, or that you signed off on ammunition shipments to units that don't exist on the official roster, or that you authorized equipment upgrades for facilities that were decommissioned 2 years ago. The room went quiet. I walked around the table slowly, my heels clicking against stone. Professional, unhurried. The sound of someone who had already won and was simply explaining the results. The embezzlement follows a clear pattern. Small diversions spread across multiple accounts. Shell corporations with single-purpose banking relationships. Fund transfers timed to coincide with periods of political tension when oversight would be minimal. I stopped behind Voss's chair. It's sophisticated. It required intimate knowledge of the system, and it required someone with enough authority that secondary verification could be bypassed. Voss turned in his chair to face me. His expression had shifted from condescension to cold calculation. You're accusing me of treason based on financial records you don't fully understand. I'm accusing you of treason based on 4 years of documented theft and a pattern of destabilization funding that correlates directly with every major political crisis this kingdom has faced. I pulled up the correlation analysis. Every time King Cassius implemented reforms that reduced regional military autonomy, you diverted more funds. Every time you strengthened central authority, you funded another shell corporation. You weren't just stealing money. You were building a war chest for a coup. The council erupted, voices overlapping, some defending Voss, others demanding answers. Voss stood up slowly, his facade of calm cracking. This is absurd. I've served this kingdom for 23 years. I've bled for these territories. And you're going to believe some human bureaucrat with a laptop over me? I'm going to believe the evidence. I pulled up the final analysis. Bank transfers traced to your personal accounts. Shell corporations registered under your wife's maiden name. Property purchases in neutral territories that suggest you were preparing an exit strategy. His expression darkened, the mask slipping completely. You arrogant little... Voss shifted, not fully, just enough that his eyes flashed red and his canines extended. A threat display meant to make me back down. I didn't move. That's not a rebuttal. That's a tantrum. He lunged, not at me, at the evidence. He grabbed my tablet off the table and hurled it against the stone wall, shattering it into expensive pieces. The room froze. I smiled. Thank you for that. Destruction of evidence during an official investigation. That's a separate charge. King Cassius hadn't moved from his position at the head of the table, hadn't intervened. This was my test. I pulled a backup tablet from my bag. I'm a security specialist. You think I only brought one copy? The backup tablet displayed the same evidence. Every transaction, every shell corporation, every piece of the conspiracy I'd spent 48 hours documenting. Voss stared at the screen, his face contorting with rage. The careful political mask he'd worn for 23 years was gone. What remained was a cornered predator who'd just realized the trap had already closed. You can't prove any of this holds up in a proper investigation. I don't need to prove it holds up. I already proved it. I pulled up the final document. Signed affidavits from 3 bank officials confirming the Shell Corporation ownership. Testimony from 2 equipment suppliers who were paid to falsify delivery records. And security footage from your private estate showing you meeting with known insurgent operatives from the Northern Territories. I turned to face the council. Lord Voss didn't just embezzle funds. He's been actively funding a separatist movement designed to fracture the Continental Alliance. The same alliance you're all gathered here to strengthen. The council members who'd been defending him went silent. Political calculation replacing loyalty. No one wanted to be associated with treason. Voss's control snapped completely. He shifted fully this time, bones cracking, body contorting into a massive gray wolf that filled half the council chamber. Several council members scrambled back. The predator instinct to flee from an alpha in full rage overwhelmed their political composure. I didn't move. I'd anticipated this exact scenario. The gray wolf lunged, not at King Cassius, at me, eliminating the source of the evidence. The tactical choice of someone who understood that killing the auditor might buy him time to escape. I pulled the concealed taser from my jacket holster in one smooth motion, military grade, designed specifically for supernatural targets. The kind of equipment you carry when you audit security systems run by people who might not appreciate your findings. I fired. The electrodes caught Voss mid-lunge. 50,000 volts designed to override even an alpha's nervous system. He crashed to the stone floor 3 feet from where I stood, his massive body convulsing. I stepped over his twitching form without breaking stride, returned to my position at the display screen. As I was saying, I pulled up the next slide. The embezzlement was just the funding mechanism. The real conspiracy involves a coordinated attempt to trigger a civil war during the treaty signing. Lord Voss planned to use the chaos to position himself as a stabilizing force, a return to regional military autonomy under his leadership. I looked around the table at the stunned faces. The protocol fix I implemented 3 days ago didn't just prevent an assassination, it prevented regime collapse. The poison daggers were already in place. Voss's operatives were positioned to introduce them during the ceremony. If King Cassius hadn't given me operational authority, you'd all be dead right now. King Cassius finally moved. He walked to where Voss lay paralyzed on the floor, still in wolf form, unable to shift back while the electricity disrupted his system. 23 years. The king's voice was quiet. Lethal. I trusted you with my kingdom's defense. He looked up at the council. The auditor stays. She has full operational authority to investigate anyone she deems necessary. Anyone who disagrees can join Voss in the detention cells. No one disagreed. I disconnected my tablet and gathered my equipment. I'll have the complete conspiracy network map by morning. I recommend immediate arrest warrants for the 17 co-conspirators I've identified. Coordinate with Sebastian for tactical execution. I walked toward the door, stepping over Voss one more time. His eyes tracked me with pure hatred. I looked down at him. I audit security systems. You think I came unarmed to confront a traitor? The door closed behind me with a satisfying finality. I made it halfway down the corridor before King Cassius caught up with me. My study, now. Not a request. But I'd just dismantled a 23-year conspiracy in front of his entire council. I'd earned the right to negotiate the terms of this conversation. I have 17 arrest warrants to coordinate with Sebastian, and a complete network analysis to finish before morning. Sebastian can handle the warrants. The network analysis can wait 2 hours. He fell into step beside me, his presence filling the corridor. We need to talk. About the fact that you just took down my oldest advisor with a taser and a spreadsheet. About the fact that you've been here less than a week and you've already prevented a coup. About the fact that I'm trying very hard to maintain professional boundaries with someone who keeps proving she's the most competent person in my kingdom. I stop walking, turn to face him directly. Professional boundaries exist for a reason. I'm aware. He moved closer, not threatening, something else entirely. I'm also aware that you treat me like a client instead of a king, that you've never once bowed, that you walked into a room full of hostile alphas and systematically destroyed a decorated war hero's credibility without breaking a sweat. That's my job. That's not just competence, that's fearlessness. His golden eyes held mine. Most people are terrified of me. You're annoyed I'm wasting your time. Because you are wasting my time. I have work to do. He smiled, that dangerous smile that probably made weaker people forget their own names. 2 hours, my study. We discuss your permanent contract terms, and I promise to keep it professional. I calculated the risk-reward ratio. The smart move was to maintain distance. Keep the client relationship transactional. Don't blur the lines between professional authority and personal connection. But I'd just proven I could handle an alpha in full rage with a taser and zero backup. I could handle a contract negotiation. Fine, 2 hours. But I'm billing you for the time. I wouldn't expect anything less. His private study was exactly as I'd left it 3 days ago. Dark leather furniture, aggressive masculinity, the scent of old books and expensive whiskey. King Cassius poured 2 glasses without asking. This time I accepted one. You want me to stay permanently. I want you to rebuild my kingdom's operational infrastructure. That's not a short-term project. It's also not a traditional employment relationship. You're asking me to have authority that supersedes your counsel, to make decisions that will make powerful people uncomfortable, to essentially function as your operational co-ruler without any of the official title or protection that comes with it. He set his glass down. What would make you feel protected? A contract with clear parameters, full operational authority in writing, and the understanding that I don't do destiny, I don't do fate. I do professional relationships with defined success metrics. His expression shifted. You felt it, in the hallway that first day. The bond. I didn't pretend not to know what he meant. I felt a biochemical response, pheromone compatibility. It's a data point, not a destiny. Most people would call it a mating bond. I'm not most people, and I don't make life decisions based on biology. I make them based on logic and professional assessment. King Cassius leaned forward. Then assess this logically. You're the most competent person I've ever met. You've proven you can handle threats I didn't even know existed. You treat my authority as irrelevant and my instincts as data to be analyzed. And somehow that makes me trust you more than anyone who's ever bowed to me. I held his gaze. What are you actually asking? Stay. Not as my mate. Not because of some mystical bond. Stay because you're good at this. Because my kingdom needs someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. Because I need someone who treats me like a client instead of a deity. I considered the offer. Weighted against every professional boundary I'd ever maintained. I'll stay as Chief Security Officer, full operational authority, autonomous decision-making, and the bond remains unacknowledged, a variable I'm choosing to manage, not surrender to. He smiled. Deal. He didn't let me leave immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying me with that predatory focus I was getting uncomfortably familiar with. There's something you need to know about the bond, since we're treating it as a variable to be managed. I set my glass down. I'm listening. I recognized your scent the moment you walked into the palace, before I saw you, before I knew anything about you except that you smelled like petrichor and wild honeysuckle. He paused. That's not normal attraction. That's biological certainty. The mating bond in werewolf hierarchy isn't a suggestion. It's a fact. Facts can be managed with appropriate protocols. His mouth curved slightly. You're going to protocol your way through a supernatural connection that's existed for thousands of years? I'm going to treat it like any other high-impact variable in a complex system. Acknowledge it exists, account for its influence, make decisions based on logic rather than letting it make decisions for me. King Cassius stood up and moved to the fireplace. The flames cast shadows across his face, making him look even more like the predator he was. Most wolves spend their entire lives searching for their mate. When they find them, it's the single most important moment of their existence. And you're treating it like a data point in a risk assessment. Because that's what it is, a biochemical compatibility marker. It doesn't obligate me to surrender my autonomy or compromise my professional judgment. He turned to face me. What if I told you I want more than a professional relationship? I'd say that's a separate negotiation, and one I'm not interested in having until I've proven I can function in this role without the bond influencing my decisions. You're asking me to ignore the most powerful connection I've ever felt. I'm asking you to respect that I don't make life decisions based on feelings I didn't choose to have. I stood up, meeting his eyes across the room. You hired me because I'm competent, because I don't bow, because I treat you like a client instead of a king. The moment I start making decisions based on the bond instead of professional assessment, I lose the only thing that makes me valuable to you. The silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, evaluative. You're right. He moved closer, stopping just outside my personal space. You're absolutely right. And somehow, that makes me want you more. That's the bond talking. No, that's me recognizing that you're the first person who's ever demanded I earn something instead of just taking it because I'm strong enough to claim it. I held my ground. Then earn it. Prove you can work with me as an equal partner in running this kingdom. Prove the bond doesn't compromise your judgment any more than it compromises mine. And maybe, eventually, we'll renegotiate the terms. His smile was slow, dangerous. You just turned a mating bond into a performance contract. I turn everything into a performance contract. It's how I function. King Cassius laughed quietly. Fine, we'll do this your way. Professional relationship, autonomous authority. The bond remains a managed variable. He extended his hand. Deal? I shook his hand. The contact sent that same electric jolt through my system. The bond recognizing the connection, even as I refused to acknowledge its authority over my choices. Deal. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have 17 conspirators to arrest and a kingdom to restructure. I walked toward the door. His voice stopped me at the threshold. Rena. I turned back. Thank you for treating me like someone who has to earn respect instead of someone who's owed it. I met his eyes one last time. You're welcome. Now stop wasting my billable hours with sentiment. His laughter followed me down the corridor. The next 3 weeks were systematic demolition. I treated the kingdom's infrastructure like a failing corporation, identified inefficiencies, eliminated redundancies, fired anyone whose loyalty exceeded their competence. The first casualty was Lord Brennan, the head of intelligence. 20 years of service, decorated analyst, completely incapable of adapting his regional conflict methodology to continental politics. I called him into my new office at 8 a.m, had his termination paperwork ready before he sat down. Your intelligence gathering system is designed for wars we're no longer fighting. You're collecting data we don't need while missing threats that actually matter. I'm restructuring the entire division. Your position has been eliminated. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. You can't just fire me. I've served this kingdom since before you were born. I can. I did. Security will escort you out in 20 minutes. Your pension is intact. Your access is revoked immediately. He appealed directly to King Cassius, demanded a meeting, got one. I sat in the king's study while Brennan made his case. Loyalty, experience, years of dedicated service. King Cassius listened, then looked at me. Your assessment. Lord Brennan is excellent at fighting the last war. We need someone who can predict the next one. His replacement starts Monday. The king turned back to Brennan. The auditor's decision stands. Thank you for your service. Brennan left. 3 more senior advisors resigned in protest. I replaced them all within 48 hours. The second week, I restructured the Economic Advisory Council, fired 2 analysts who were using financial models from before digital currency existed, brought in specialists who understood modern markets. The diplomatic corps was next. I eliminated the entire protocol division that spent more time arguing about seating arrangements than actual policy. Replaced them with strategists who treated international relations like chess instead of theater. King Cassius watched me work with a mixture of admiration and territorial frustration. I was dismantling everything he'd built. Every comfortable relationship. Every loyal subordinate who'd served him for years. The confrontation happened on day 16. I was in the war room, reorganizing the command structure, when he walked in and closed the door with deliberate force. "You just fired 3 of my most loyal commanders." I fired 3 commanders whose loyalty exceeded their tactical competence. There's a difference. They've been with me since I took the throne, which is why they're comfortable. Comfortable commanders don't adapt. They rely on what worked before and hope it works again. I pulled up the performance metrics on the main screen. Commander Hayes has a 73% mission success rate. Commander Torres has 68%. Commander Reeves has 54%. Those aren't acceptable numbers for elite military leadership. They're loyal. Loyalty doesn't win wars. Competence wins wars. Loyalty just makes you feel better about losing. His jaw tightened, the predator surfacing. "You're dismantling everything I built." I turned to face him directly. "I'm removing the structural flaws that would have collapsed your kingdom within 18 months. You built something impressive using pure dominance and tactical brilliance, but you built it on a foundation of personal relationships instead of institutional systems. The moment you're not personally present to enforce those relationships, everything falls apart. So you're fixing it by destroying it." "I'm fixing it by making it sustainable. You wanted a kingdom that functions without you micromanaging every decision. That requires infrastructure, systems that work regardless of who's running them. Commanders who succeed because they're competent, not because you personally inspire them to perform." He was quiet for a long moment. I could see him processing, instinct warring with logic. They deserved better than a cold termination meeting. They deserved honest assessment instead of comfortable mediocrity. I gave them that. And generous severance packages. And references that emphasize their loyalty without lying about their capabilities. King Cassius moved closer. "You're not changing my vision. You're making it actually work. That's what you're paying me for." His expression shifted. "I'm starting to think I'm not paying you enough. We can renegotiate after I finish restructuring your disaster of a supply chain management system." He laughed despite himself. "You're terrifying." "I'm thorough. People keep confusing the two." The diplomatic dinner was supposed to be a formality. 20 visiting alphas from neighboring territories. Trade discussions. Treaty renewals. The kind of political theater that required my presence in the ballroom instead of my preferred location in the command center. I wore the midnight blue gown King Cassius had selected, high-necked, long-sleeved, designed to look elegant while concealing the tactical gear I'd integrated into the lining. Old habits from auditing security systems run by people who occasionally took professional criticism personally. The dinner progressed exactly as predicted. Speeches, toasts, performative diplomacy that accomplished nothing substantive. I monitored the security feeds on my phone under the table, tracking patrol patterns and access points out of professional paranoia. That's when the alarms triggered. Multiple breach points, simultaneous entry, coordinated timing that suggested military training and inside knowledge of our security protocols. I stood up from the table, already moving toward the exit. King Cassius was across the ballroom, surrounded by visiting dignitaries, tactically isolated, exactly where an assassination team would want him. My phone lit up with Sebastian's emergency channel. "Command center compromised. Hostiles have access to building schematics. Primary target appears to be..." The line went dead. I switched to the backup communication system I'd installed 3 days ago, the one only Sebastian and I knew existed. "Sebastian, status." His voice came through, strained but functional. 6 hostiles in the command center. They cut primary communications. I'm locked in the archive room with 2 guards. We're pinned. I pulled up the security grid on my phone, analyzed the breach pattern. 6 hostiles in command, 4 more moving through the service corridors toward the ballroom, 2 positioned at the main exits. 12 total. Professional deployment. They weren't trying to kill everyone. They were trying to kill someone specific. I ran the tactical analysis. King Cassius was the obvious target. Except the breach pattern didn't support that. The hostiles moving toward the ballroom were avoiding his position, circling around the perimeter instead of converging on the center where he stood. They were hunting me. Voss's remaining faction. They'd identified the structural integrity holding the regime together. Remove the auditor, collapse the new systems. Return to the comfortable chaos where they'd thrived. I switched channels, connected directly to King Cassius through the encrypted earpiece I'd given him 2 weeks ago. North exit. 3 hostiles approaching your position. Don't engage. Move to the eastern corridor and wait for my signal. His voice came back immediately. Where are you? Handling it. Trust my assessment and follow the protocol. I could hear the predator in him wanting to fight, the king in him recognizing that I had better tactical information. Confirmed. Moving east. I redirected the security teams through the backup system, sealed the ballroom exits except for the eastern corridor, funneled the hostile forces into predetermined kill zones where our people had numerical advantage and superior positioning. The command center hostiles were the priority target. They had access to building systems, could override locks, cut power, turn our own infrastructure against us. I pulled up the emergency protocol I designed for exactly this scenario, activated the isolated power grid that bypassed the main command center, locked down the compromised systems, and rerouted control to my phone. The hostiles in the command center suddenly found themselves locked inside a room with no access to anything except each other. I triggered the secondary security measure, flooded the command center with concentrated wolfsbane gas through the ventilation system. Not lethal, just incapacitating enough to neutralize supernatural threats without permanent damage. 6 hostiles down. The 4 moving through the service corridors were closing on my last known position. I'd evacuated the ballroom 3 minutes ago. Let them think I was running. I was leading them into a trap. The service corridor terminated in a storage area I'd converted into a tactical response station. Reinforced doors, limited entry points, defensive positioning that turned numerical advantage into a liability. I waited in the darkness, tracking their approach through thermal imaging on my phone. 4 heat signatures, moving in formation. Professional. Careful. They breached the storage room door. I triggered the flashbang I'd positioned at entry level. Blinding light, disorienting sound, the kind of sensory overload that disrupted even supernatural reflexes. Then I moved. I wasn't fast like a werewolf. I didn't have supernatural strength or healing. What I had was tactical preparation and 0 hesitation. The first hostile recovered from the flashbang faster than the others. Military training. Good instincts. He turned toward where I'd been standing 3 seconds ago. I was already behind him. Taser to the base of his spine. 50,000 volts. He dropped. The second one shifted mid-disorientation. Partial transformation, claws extended. He swung blind, relying on predator instinct to locate prey. I ducked under the swing and hit him with the backup taser. The electricity disrupted his shift. He collapsed halfway between human and wolf, his nervous system unable to complete either form. The third hostile had better tactical sense. He didn't engage. He retreated toward the door, trying to regroup with the 4th operative who was still recovering vision. I triggered the secondary trap. The reinforced door slammed shut on pneumatic hinges, sealed them inside with me. The third hostile realized his mistake. Trapped in a confined space with someone who'd planned every angle. He reached for his weapon. I shot him with the ballistic gel rounds I'd loaded into the concealed firearm integrated into my evening gown. Non-lethal. Designed to incapacitate without permanent damage. He went down hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. The 4th hostile finally recovered his vision, saw 3 of his team down, saw me standing in tactical gear that had been hidden under formal wear. Made the smart choice. He surrendered. I zip-tied all 4 of them to the reinforced storage racks, called Sebastian on the backup channel. Command center secure? Secure. Wolfsbane gas did its job. All 6 hostiles in custody. I have 4 more in storage bay 3. Send a team to collect them. You took down 4 hostiles alone? I led 4 hostiles into a pre-prepared tactical environment and executed the appropriate response protocol. There's a difference. I could hear the smile in his voice. The king is going to lose his mind. The king is going to follow the evacuation protocol and meet me at the secondary command post like I instructed. I left the storage bay and moved through the service corridors toward the ballroom. The 2 hostiles positioned at the main exits had been neutralized by our security teams. Clean sweep. No casualties on our side. King Cassius was waiting in the eastern corridor when I arrived. He looked like he was vibrating with suppressed violence. The predator barely contained. You used yourself as bait. I identified that I was the primary target and adjusted tactics accordingly. Leading them into a controlled environment was more efficient than trying to protect multiple locations simultaneously. He moved closer. Not threatening, something else entirely. You could have died. I could have failed to adequately prepare. I didn't. The threat is neutralized. 0 casualties, 12 hostiles in custody. That's a successful outcome. His hands came up to frame my face, gentle despite the violence still radiating from him. You're standing here covered in tactical gear and zip tie residue, telling me about successful outcomes, and all I can think about is that you deliberately put yourself in danger. I deliberately executed a tactical plan that minimized overall risk. My personal safety was a variable I managed appropriately. You're not a variable. His voice dropped to something rough, dangerous. You're chief security officer, who just prevented an assassination attempt and dismantled a coordinated assault with 0 losses. You're welcome. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed. That deep, rumbling sound that meant I'd surprised him again. You're impossible. I'm effective. People keep confusing the two. The private aftermath happened in the archive room, my safe space, the place where I'd built the case against Voss, where I'd spent 3 weeks systematically rebuilding his kingdom's infrastructure. I was compiling the post-incident report when King Cassius found me. He didn't speak immediately, just sat in the chair across from my workstation and waited. Professional courtesy, respecting my process. I finished the tactical analysis section before I acknowledged him. The assault was well coordinated. Voss's remaining faction had inside knowledge of our security protocols. They exploited the diplomatic dinner as a distraction opportunity. They almost succeeded. They never had a chance of succeeding. I identified the vulnerability 3 days ago and implemented countermeasures. The only variable was whether they'd attempt the breach during this event or wait for the next one. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You knew this was coming and didn't tell me? I told Sebastian. He had tactical need to know. You had diplomatic obligations that required your full attention. Telling you would have compromised your ability to function in the role only you could fill. I almost lost you tonight. You almost lost your chief security officer. There's a difference. I saved the report and closed my laptop, met his eyes directly. I handled it. That's what you pay me for. I don't pay you to be bait for assassination attempts. You pay me to identify threats and neutralize them using the most efficient methodology available. Tonight, that methodology involved using myself as a tactical asset. I stood up, suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline crash hitting. I'm good at my job, Cassius. Stop second-guessing my professional judgment. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you called me Cassius. I realized he was right. First time I'd used his name instead of his title. The professional distance slipping. The bond is getting stronger. His voice was gentle, not pushing, just acknowledging. You feel it too. I did. The pull toward him. The way my analytical brain kept flagging him as the most important variable in every calculation. The way I'd positioned myself between him and danger tonight without conscious thought. I don't know how to be competent and vulnerable simultaneously. Then be competent. He stood up and moved closer. I'll handle the vulnerability for both of us. The offer landed like a tactical proposition, a negotiation of terms I hadn't known I was ready to discuss. What are you actually asking? Stay, not as my employee, as my partner. Equal authority in running this kingdom. You fix the structural problems, I handle the primal politics. We build something that actually works instead of something that just looks impressive. I studied him with the same clinical assessment I'd used that first day, except now I had 3 weeks of data. I'd seen him defer to my judgment, support my decisions even when they contradicted his instincts, trust my competence over his own territorial impulses. I fix your kingdom. You handle the supernatural complications I'm not equipped to manage. Deal. And the bond remains a managed variable, not ignored, but not in control. His smile was slow, dangerous. I can work with that. I held out my hand, professional, transactional. He took it. The contact sent that familiar electric jolt through my system, the bond recognizing something my analytical brain was still processing. Then we have an agreement, Your Majesty. Cassius. His grip tightened slightly. If we're partners, you use my name. Fine, Cassius. I pulled my hand back. Now let me finish this report before Sebastian sends another status request. He laughed and headed for the door, stopped at the threshold. Thank you for staying, for fixing everything I didn't know was broken. You're welcome. Now stop interrupting my billable hours. 6 months later, I stood in the redesigned throne room, reviewing the new security grid on my tablet. King Cassius entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, placed one on my workstation without interrupting my focus. I glanced up. Your protocol is still trash, but it's improving. His smirk was familiar now, comfortable. Fix it. You have full authority. I returned to my analysis. He settled into the chair beside me, content to work in silence. The kingdom ran like a machine now, efficient, sustainable, built on systems instead of personal dominance. And somehow, in the process of fixing his structural problems, I'd built something I'd never expected, a partnership that actually worked.